Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today's the 25th of November, 2018, and today we're going to do what has actually been requested. I didn't actually consider doing this until it's been requested so many times, and that is a little tour of the area here where I work. So this is my edit suite, I guess you could say, and I do some mixing here. I do all the editing of my videos here, and also when I'm working on someone else's films, if I'm doing the mixing, I obviously do that here as well. So just a few things. I didn't want to do this because it felt a little bit like, look at the awesome stuff I have. And I want to make sure that everyone's aware you can make great stuff. You don't have to have expensive tools to make great stuff. Much more modest tools can do the job in many, many cases. So the difference is once you start getting paid, that's where sometimes you need to invest a little bit more for the reliability, the consistency, the ability to have something repaired if it goes, if something breaks, whatever. So don't take this. I'm not trying to convince anybody to buy any of this stuff. I am just showing you what I have here. Let's just consider this like a couple of friends that are both enthusiasts and into sound for video and film, just having a chat. So that's how we'll do this today. Let's talk about a few things. So first of all, obviously I'm using an iMac. This is an iMac Pro. It's the 10-core version. Is that necessary? Not really. I have, in the United States, for those of you that aren't here, maybe it works the same where you're at too, I don't know. But I have a business set up, Light and Sound Media, and at the end of the year, my accountant said, you need to spend some money. And my old iMac was 3 years old, so it was basically out of the AppleCare extended warranty, and so it was working fine, but we ended up buying that a couple of years ago. Was it a couple of years ago? About almost a year ago, I guess it was. So it's great. It's a great computer. I like it and it works. What else do we have on this side? You can see next up we have a couple of monitors here, near field monitors. These are the Focal Beryllium Solo 2. Beryllium Solo? I don't remember what they're called. BE Solo? Solo Bs? Don't even remember what they're called. These are my near field monitors. So they have amplifiers built in. They're powered, that is. So they can take a line level feed from a mixing board, from an audio interface, and I use that to monitor when I'm doing the majority of my mixing. Why did I go with these? Now, these are fairly expensive. I think they were $3,500 for the pair of them, for just two. The reason I went with them, I had before been using some KRK rockets, the 8-inch woofer size rockets, and those were pretty decent as starting monitors. But I found that there were some cases where I was having a hard time picking out, especially the high frequencies. That one, the low end, the bass tended to be a little bit not very controlled, I guess. And I actually, on the advice of a guy by the name of Mike Sr., who does a lot of mixing and has written a book about mixing, he suggested that you actually stuff socks, clean socks, mind you, into the the bass reflex ports. The holes generally you see. In fact, these have them as well. On those, he suggests as a rule of thumb, and it's not going to apply in every single case, but he said a lot of times the less expensive monitors don't have the amount of R&D and design in them for those ports to really work in a well-controlled way. A lot of times they're just getting you a better spec, the ability for that speaker to produce a lower frequency low, but oftentimes they will have resonances that don't work well. They will end up with one-note bass issues and things of that nature. And in my case, I was finding it hard to hear certain things, and so I ended up resorting to headphones a lot. And there's kind of a pluses and minuses. Headphones are great for some things. It's better to have speakers for other things if you can. So in any case, that's part of the reason I went with these. So these have a much cleaner separation between the frequencies, especially at the higher frequencies. And I think partly that's because the lower frequencies are better controlled. So that's just a little bit of a backstory on those. So they're not cheap. This same company, Focal, makes some less expensive monitors as well, which are they're quite good as well. I really like them. It's a French company. They seem to do really nice work. So I've been really happy with them. I've had them I think about a year and a half, maybe 2 years now. So they've been really, really good. Do not regret that purchase at all. Okay, next up, let's talk about headphones. So on the more affordable end, let's start there. I don't use these a lot when I'm mixing here, but these I use more in production. These are Sony MDR7506s, and these are kind of you see these headphones everywhere. They're in lots of studios for tracking. That is to say, they're worn by the artists as they're recording. I use them when I'm doing voiceover. I use them when I'm doing location sound mixing, when I'm the actual sound guy. The reason I like these a lot is that they're incredibly comfortable and they fold up and are easy to take with you. They also come with a kind of a pleather pouch that works nicely. They also have a coiled cable, which I generally prefer. Some people, that's like a religious debate. If you like coiled cables, great. If you hate coiled cables, great. Get straight ones instead. It's whatever you prefer. A few things I like about these. So number one, they're comfortable. They fold. The sound is decent. It is colored. It's not a perfectly natural, perfectly flat response. They're a little bit bass heavy, to be honest. But what I do find is if I know that, I can kind of compensate for that in my mind. But again, it's mainly the convenience and the comfort that I like. And then the last thing is that you can actually buy replacement parts, not spare parts, but replacement parts for these. So if something breaks, you can actually replace them, and just even B&H carries the replacement parts. So, and they're less than $100. I think you can often find them for about $80, somewhere between $80 and $100. So been a good set of headphones. I really like them. I used to use a set of Beyerdynamic DT770s, also very common headphones in studio settings. You'll see them a lot. Those are about $200 last I checked. I haven't looked at them recently, but they are also closed back headphones. Oh, that's another thing. So you get pretty decent isolation with these. They're not noise canceling. I would never use noise canceling for critical listening. I use noise canceling on an airplane or when I'm listening for pleasure, but not for, or like when I'm at the office and it's noisy. But these have decent isolation just because they're closed back. And if you're using them while you are recording yourself, like I do when I'm doing voiceover, they don't bleed out a lot of sound. So it's not like the sound is going to bleed out of the headphones back into your microphone and create a mess there. And the same with the Beyerdynamic DT770s. I found those work very well as well for that purpose. The reason I use the Sonys instead of the Beyerdynamics, and actually my wife has taken possession of them. She really likes them. She was using them for a project. The Beyerdynamics are also very good, also incredibly comfortable. They have the same velour ear cups like this is actually the DT880s, but they had the similar kind of velour style ear cups, and they're very, very, very comfortable. I love them for that. The only reason I don't use the DT770s for production sound as much anymore is that they're just so bulky. They don't fold, and they're kind of big and bulky. So that moves us on to the DT880 Pros. These are semi-open back, so I don't know what semi-open back means exactly. They're either open or they're not. Evidently, these are less open than some other open backs. But I like to use these when I'm mixing. When you have an open back headphone, by mixing I mean actually post-mixing, when it's okay for a little bit of sound to bleed out the back. That is a kind of a design trade-off. I think you get a better stereo sound stage when you have an open back headphone. And I think the overall frequency response, because of that, what the open back does in terms of, I don't know. I don't know the details. I'm not an acoustician and I'm not a headphone designer, but it seems like you can get better sound overall. You can get a more even response overall, maybe. I'm not sure. But in any case, I really like these for when I'm doing post-mixing. All right, now we're going to go and look at a set of headphones that are ridiculous in an awesome way. And again, this is where I want to say I'm not trying to convince anybody to have to buy any of this stuff. But these are my favorite set of headphones that I have here. These are the Sennheiser HD 820s. Do I have that right? I think I have it right. So these are actually relatively new. The Sennheiser's been making the 800 series for a number of years now. The thing that's unique about this one, relative to the others are all open back, if I understand correctly. This is the first closed back of their Audiophile line, or what they call their reference line of headphones. And this one actually has a closed convex glass back. And evidently they put a lot of research and design into this and getting the exact right shape and the right materials to make a really, really impressive reference headphone. So I've been using these a lot more lately. and I really love them. But the problem is, of course, they're $2,400. So not too many people can afford those. I totally understand, and that's why I wanted to underscore the fact that I'm not trying to sell anybody on any of this stuff here, just giving you a little tour here. They're incredibly comfortable. The ear cups are like rooms around your ears. It's an amazing sound. One thing I have noticed, though, you do have to get them positioned just right on your head. You can't just pop them on and expect them to sound perfect. Everyone's head and ears are a little different, and so you're going to have to adjust it a little bit. When I first got them and put them on, even after a burn-in period, so typically you're supposed to do like a 100-hour burn-in period or something like that. Even after that period, I was kind of feeling like, wow, there's not a lot of bass here. And I'm not looking for like a hip-hop heavy bass kind of experience. I'm looking for a kind of an even, pleasant sound, a reference sound that can help me identify issues. And what I found was that I didn't have the mic or the headphones positioned just right on my head. So just making a little adjustment there and riding them just a little bit higher up. So basically my bottom of my ears are sitting right here, and my ears didn't come all the way up to the top. That seemed to produce the best sound for my particular ears. So those are really lovely headphones. They come, you can tell they're audiophile reference headphones for a couple of reasons. Number one, they do not have a 3.5 millimeter jack or a plug. They only have a 1/4 inch, and they also have, I think they came with a couple of, like an XLR style balanced cable as well. So that's for using with special headphone amplifiers that they also produce, which are also about $2,000. So anyway, that was, that's fun. They sound amazing. It's an amazing experience for your ears. And I love using them. Next we have down here, you can't see it in this frame, I'll put some B-roll in here so you can see it. I've got a little rack here, just a miniature rack, a 4-unit rack. On the top I have a Furman power conditioner. Some people have asked me, why do you have that these days? It doesn't seem like it's really necessary unless, a lot of times they would use those in live sound rigs, because you would go into clubs where the power, they're in these old buildings and the power was really unreliable, and there were shorts and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. I actually live out in the countryside, and we have our own set of issues with power. And there are others that claim that even if you're in the, in the middle of the city in a modern building, you can still have issues with power. And this has actually certainly saved me through a few power outages and surges, but I've also never experienced any other issues. And I have everything basically plugged into that. So all of the audio gear and all of the gear that is also connected to the computer. So it's all connected at some level. If you don't protect all of it, you can run into problems. So it has a couple of these little things you can pull out with lights. So if you're using it in sort of a dark environment, that's great. So that's the Furman power conditioner. Next I have the Focusrite, what's this one called? Trackmaster Pro. This is an old piece of analog gear. It was actually one of the first piece of professional audio outboard gear things that I bought. I bought this with an Roland USB audio interface, and what this did for me is it's high quality preamplifier. Relatively, I think it's class A. Not entirely sure. So for those that are into that, but it does sound really good. It has about 55 dB of gain. It also has a compressor. It has this sort of EQ scoop thing, so you get one EQ band, and it's mainly for taking care of like honkiness and you get in certain microphones with certain voices, so you can do a little bit of a cut there. It does have the compressor, a very simple one, and then it does have this monitoring, so this no latency monitoring. So if you want to monitor at the actual preamp itself while you're still in the analog stage, you can do that. And of course, it also has this little VU meter. Actually, it's peak level, excuse me, it's a peak meter. Although I think that can change. You can go to different views here. In any case, it's a nice piece of gear. I don't use it a whole ton if I am doing a live interview with somebody else, like a double ender or something. Or especially, well, if it's a double ender, it's not live. But if it is live, I'll sometimes use this because then I get that compression on the signal that's sent over the wire, over the internet to the other party. So what that means is they can get the loudness where they need to a little bit easier. My voice, and actually most voices tend to be fairly dynamic. So being able to kind of manage some of the transients and pull those back in before you loudness normalize it is really helpful. So that's kind of the main reason I hold on to that piece of gear. I don't use it a ton, but it's there when I need it. Next up is an empty spot. Let me just explain that. I did have an Audiophile interface. Just recently, I gave it to one of my friends who is a musician. It was an Antelope Audio Orion Studio. It was a $2,500 audio interface. It was Thunderbolt 2. And they had released a newer version that was Thunderbolt 3 with USB-C connection. What I found was it was a lovely, lovely interface. It had probably like 10 mic preamps, way more than I needed. I only really needed one in most cases, possibly two in a few cases. But what it had also was just really, really good preamplifiers. And then it also had all these emulations that are typically the types of things that musicians are going to be more interested in using, and those are going to be things like emulations of outboard analog gear, different preamplifiers, different microphones, things of that nature. Not something that I was really using a whole lot. But the problem I had with that interface was it was just incredibly unreliable from the standpoint of software drivers. And I don't know if it works better on Windows. The guy I gave it to actually uses Windows. It was both, and I should say, it was Thunderbolt 2 and USB, and whenever I used it on USB on my Mac, it just, all sorts of issues. It sounds, these sort of crackly distortion sounds that are often the result of sample rate conversion issues and things of that nature. So I tried to live with it. I spent hours and hours and hours on technical support with Antelope Audio, and we just couldn't get it solved. And so it was time to move on. So I had work to do, and I needed to move on. So that's when I purchased, and these just came out recently, the Universal Audio Apollo X6. This is the low end of their Apollo line, of the newest Apollo line. What this is a very similar thing to what I had with the Orion Studio, but what's different about this one is my brother's been using one for years and years and since the original Apollos came out. I think that's probably 6 or 8 years ago now, probably something like that. He's had very, very good luck with them. And in terms of the drivers working with Mac, always had good luck with them. So far, I've had a great experience with them. I like that there are also physical controls for separate things. On the Orion, you had to share one big knob for basically everything. And that got to be a little bit of a pain. Like if I wanted to switch quickly to headphones, it was a bit of a pain. I had to mute the main monitors, which was no big deal, which you press in the big knob. Then I had to push a button to get over to the headphones, then I could adjust the headphones. On this, I can just push in the big knob to mute the monitors, and then I've got a separate knob for each of the headphone outputs, and there are 2 of them. That is actually really helpful. In terms of the quality of the preamplifiers, I think they're great. You can go on to forums like, I'm not even going to name any, but if you want to go spend hours and hours on forums, there are a lot of people that swear by these. There are a lot of people that hate them. I find them to be very good. I'm not making any apologies. If you disagree, that's fine. You can disagree. But I find it to be a really great unit. It also, by the end of this year, and maybe it's already out by now, I haven't checked, it also enables you to do 5.1 surround monitoring, which is something I hope to set up here perhaps in the next year or 2. So being able to have that capability of doing full surround monitoring is going to be really nice with that. So that's the Apollo X6. Let's take a look over here. We now have, just hidden under here because I don't use this a ton, but I do have it mainly for, to be honest, educational purposes, or if I'm just going to do live sound for a very simple gig here. This is a Mackie 802 VLZ4 analog mixer. I really like this mixer actually just in terms of having a small analog, 100% analog mixer. There is no digital USB or any other type of digital output. There's a power in, a power switch, and then you have 3 mic preamps. You have 2 XLR outputs, balanced outputs. You have some other main outs on 1/4 inch, so you can go out that can be balanced or unbalanced. You have an aux send. It's just a very simple, really useful mixer. So I have that, again, mainly for very simple live sound jobs if I'm going to be doing that. Or if I was going to doing a podcast and I didn't have more capable mixers, I would probably use this, but I do, so I generally won't use this. No no compressor or anything on it. It does have an EQ. It has a 12 kilohertz, 2.5 kilohertz, and 80 hertz knobs, so those are fixed. But in any case, it works really well. It sounds good. The preamps are actually quite good. They call them their Onyx preamps. The thing is if you're going to make a cool mixer or recorder, it's best if you can name your preamps, because then they sound more boutique that way. Mackie has called theirs Onyx. I think that Sound Devices called their mix preamps their Cashmere preamps, and so on and so forth. Next up, we have the Allen & Heath SQ5 mixer over here. This is a digital mixer, and you can see it has multiple banks, so I can switch. Let's see if we go back here and adjust some of these. You can see we have motorized faders on this thing. This is a lot of fun. What do I use this for? Well, a couple of things. Number one, again, if I'm doing a bigger live sound job, I would use this. I don't do a lot of those, but when I do, I would use that. The main thing I actually bought this for was to use as a control surface for digital audio workstations when I'm mixing a film and I need more than just one fader. So that's the main reason I purchased this. However, this does have some other really cool features. It does have an auto mixer on it, so if you were doing a panel discussion or a podcast of something of that nature, it does have that auto mix feature, which is really nice. So that's another cool feature about it. And what else can I tell you, I guess? It has all sorts of effects. You can do additional plug-in effects. It has a high-pass filter, gate, a compressor, obviously a pan. But it actually is laid out very nicely, and it's actually quite nice to work with. And so that's another thing I have. Not something I use a ton, but it is something that is a useful tool when I need it. Let's talk about I do have some microphones. I store a few of my microphones here. I also have a little cabinet here with some of the other microphones. Probably my most used indoor dialogue microphone is the Sennheiser MKH 8050. It is the very small Supercardioid polar pattern. Let's hold it there. You can probably see it better there. So it's very easy to put out on a boom pole because it's so small and light. It is essentially, if I understand correctly, having talked with some of the product people at Sennheiser, the 8050 and the 8060 are the updated versions of the MKH 50, which is a Supercardioid mic that a lot of sound mixers use. This is the more modern version. That 50 was originally, the MKH 50 was originally designed in the analog recording days. This was really designed in the digital recording days, and they voiced it a little bit differently, so I think it's voiced more in line with digital recorders. And that's a huge generalization that doesn't always fit, but let me explain what I mean by that. I think a lot of times in the analog days when you're recording to tape, the responsive tape was not as sensitive in the higher frequencies, and so a lot of times what the manufacturers of microphones would do is they would voice their microphones so that there was a bit more high frequency response. It would emphasize that a little bit more. But in the digital age, those preamplifiers did a lot better, and the analog to digital converters and everything did better in terms of high frequency response. And so what Sennheiser did eventually with their updates is they went back and revoiced them for digital. So that's an interesting thing. What's funny is that I was also told by the same product people that they attempted to, once they introduced the new versions of the mics, and I guess I should say the 8060 is supposed to be, I think, the replacement for the 416, which is tons of people know about the 416. It's like the quintessential shotgun microphone. But what they tried to do is discontinue the older versions, but then there was just outrage in the community. They just wanted their old mics back. So they actually produced the old ones to this day. So that was kind of an interesting story, an interesting thing learned. It's interesting. People like certain sounds, and everyone's ears are a little bit different. I find that. It's just an interesting thing. So there's that. Couple more mics here. I'm not going to go through my entire mic cabinet. These just happen to be the three that I have here. This is the Oktava MK-012. This is one of the Russian-made versions. I think a lot of them are actually made in China now. It's a pretty good mic. If you're on a tight budget, I really like this mic. There is a hypercardioid version, hypercardioid version. This happens to be the cardioid version. I'll pull this out occasionally. It has a really nice warm sound. It doesn't do as well on a boom pole if you're moving the boom pole, because it's really the diaphragm on the microphone is really sensitive to movement. But if you get a really good shock mount, you can usually pull it off. I don't usually put it on I put it on a static boom, but I won't usually boom it by hand. And then this is the Schoeps Colette. This is a very common dialogue microphone as well. You've probably heard this if you've watched any movies in the last 20 years. Actually, I don't know how long these have been in production. I don't know if they've been in production for quite that long, but again, supercardioid, very commonly used in film production for the higher budget films. This is the MK-41 capsule that goes on the Colette preamplifier. I think they have a smaller version of this now too, but this is about a $1,600 or $1,700 mic. The Sennheiser is about a $1,200 or $1,300 mic, and the Oktava I think is about a $200 mic. Surprisingly good sounding for that price, the Oktava. So those are the microphones that I store here because I pull those out quite a bit. All right, what have we not covered here? Oh, this is actually worth noting. I have an iPad here. I do some voiceover, a little bit of voiceover work, and so when I'm reading a script, this is really helpful. I much prefer to have this with me to read off of this than printed paper copies. People have different opinions on that, and that's fine. I don't like the fact that paper copies can sometimes make noise, and I don't want noise when I'm recording. And a lot of times with the scripts I get, I can put them into a single page format and just very quietly scroll and scroll and scroll. So I don't have to take as many breaks if I don't need a break to turn a page, and it makes it a little easier to make it smoother through a paragraph if it spans 2 different pages. So I do use that. This is also used to control the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro, and I think it'll also, I'm actually shooting with the Pocket Cinema 4K camera here right now, and this can also control that. So there's that. Let's take a quick look here. Card readers for reading CFast 2 cards, SD cards, and compact flash cards. I still have compact flash in my 633, Sound Devices 633, so still need that. Oh, and then I have a couple of older pieces of gear over here. You can just barely see here. One is an audio interface from Focusrite called the Sapphire Pro 24 DSP. That was prior to the Orion from Antelope Audio, this was my main audio interface. This is actually a Firewire interface. I don't even know if it would work today. I guess you could put it in a PC with a Firewire card if you could find one still. So unfortunately, this one has probably gone the way of the Dodo, and we probably won't see any more use out of it. Its preamps were pretty decent, and I liked it. It worked well for I used it for several years, probably 4 or 5 years. And then under that, we have a Golden Age Project Pre-73 Mark II. This is a preamplifier, single-channel preamplifier. This was just something I used in the early days of my voiceover efforts. It is an analog preamplifier. It's designed to sound like a Neve 1073 preamplifier, which is a very common preamplifier that was put into the Rupert Neve consoles in recording studios for years and years and years. And this was designed to sound like that. This one actually, a lot of people will buy this one. It's like a $200, $250 preamp, I think. And they will actually have them modified. They'll take the original transformers out and put higher end transformers in them, and it just makes them melt. Not the transformers, the people. They think it sounds so amazing. It has kind of a more analog-y sound, where there's some certain frequencies do interesting things. It does sound really nice, and I keep that on hand. It's a fun one to pull out every once in a while. I also have their microphone. It's a ribbon microphone by Golden Age Project called the... Let's just pull this out so you can see it here, so I don't have to do more B-roll. This is an active ribbon microphone, which is a little bit unusual. Actually, a lot of them now, these days, the new ones that they're designing are active ribbon microphones. The old ones were more like dynamic microphones where they didn't have... they couldn't take phantom power. In fact, if you fed phantom power to an original or a kind of a classic ribbon microphone, you would actually destroy them. They would fry them, and they would have to go in for repair. So this one actually has an active circuit in it, and you do feed it phantom power, and it works just fine. It has a pad and a high-pass filter. It has a figure of 8 polar pattern. That is to say, it's sensitive on both the front and the back. So oftentimes I think you'll still see these used, well, I don't know about oftentimes, but sometimes you will see musicians, if there's a duo singing, they'll be on either side of the microphone and both can record it into the same microphone at the same time. Interesting effect. I really like this one. It works pretty nicely for a couple of things. Number one, my wife plays violin and sometimes I record her. It has a nice smooth sound for that. Her instrument can be a little bit harsh sometimes, and this tends to roll that off. So it's not as sensitive in the higher frequencies. It has a really nice roll-off pattern, and I think it's really nice for voiceover as well. So there is that microphone as well. Well, I think that's about it for the studio here. If there are any questions you have, I hope nobody stayed and watched that whole thing and is disappointed for having watched it, because again, I don't want to. I'm not trying to convince anyone they have to buy any of this stuff that I have here. But what I can say is, some of these things I use all the time. If I had to pare it down, actually maybe that's a useful discussion. If I had to pare it down, what would I keep and what would I get rid of? Well, if I had to keep only one set of headphones, I'd probably, and I was on a tighter budget, I'd probably keep the DT880s from Beyerdynamic. Those are about $200 headphones. I love my Sennheisers, but the reality is I could live without them. The Allen & Heath SQ5 I could live without. The Apollo X6 I need. That is my main audio interface, so I definitely still need that. The Furman, I would hold on to that to maintain the integrity of these electronic products here. The monitors, I would keep those if I had to go with less expensive ones, of course I would, but those work really well. The Pre-73 and the Focusrite, of course, could go. I wouldn't have to have this. This one's fun, but not critical. As far as microphones go, people may not like this answer, but the reality is if I had to choose between the Sennheiser and the Schoeps Colette, I would probably choose the Sennheiser. That's an odd thing to say. This one does have a little bit of its own sound to it, but I think it works on almost everyone's voice that I've recorded with it. The Schoeps Colette has, I think, amongst location sound mixers, it has a reputation as being a fantastic mic, and it is a fantastic mic. However, what I find is that when I record people who have sibilant voices, a lot of women and some men as well, that it is just so harsh sounding to my ears. So that's a personal preference perhaps, but I still use it. I still like the Schoeps. It's a great, very neutral sounding mic, but it can be a little bit harsh because those people's voices really just are harsh. So some post mixers would say, hey, give me the best you can, the most even response that you can get, and I'll take care of that in post. If I were working on those types of projects, I would do that more. So I'm definitely keeping the Schoeps, no question about it. But if I had to give up one, I would probably keep the Sennheiser, strange as it sounds. So, all right, let's leave it there. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. If you have not already subscribed, love to have you do that. Also, if you're not already signed up over at our school, it's free. You don't have to sign up to take one of the paid courses, but if you would like to be involved and notified when we have upcoming question and answer sessions and things of that nature, go ahead and sign up at the school. It's free, and we'll notify you when those are coming and give you kind of the heads up and saying, hey, if you have any questions you'd like us to address on the question and answer sessions, just email and we'll get that going. So that's over at school.learnlightandsound.com. Take care, everybody. Get out there and make some great sound.